Laurie's character arc in Little Women is not about Amy or Joe. It is a story how Laurie becomes a man. In Louisa May Alcott's world, the only acceptable wealthy people are the philanthropists. With Laurie's character, Louisa May Alcott also criticizes people on the top of the class system. Joe is never romantically interested about Laurie in the novel. In part 2, Joe is actually criticizing Laurie because he doesn't take his education seriously. And this is a big deal for Joe because she would like to study and go to the university. When Joe returns after an eventful year in New York and Laurie proposes her, Joe sees that Laurie is still not at all interested to find a job or to work. He basically tells her that he needs her, Joe, to be the one who tells him what to do with his life. One of the recurring themes in Little Woman is that Laurie is constantly unaware that he is privileged. One example of this is chapter Laurie Makes Mischief and Joe Makes Peace, where Laurie is 15 and he pretends to be Mr. Brooke and he's catfishing Meg by sending him letters under Mr. Brooke's name. And Meg was 17 at the time. There was already a rumor going on that Meg and Laurie were an item, and that Marmee was trying to marry Meg to Laurie, which happened earlier in the Meg Goes to Vanity Fair chapter. Of course, Marmee hated this rumor, and so did Meg, but Laurie was completely unaware that he almost ruined Meg's reputation, his tutor's reputation. And since Joe was hoping that Meg would marry Laurie so Laurie could be her brother, it shows that Joe was also quite unaware what is the actual cost of these kind of rumors. There are a lot of these type of instances in Little Woman. In part 2, Laurie is often questioned for buying nice and expensive clothes for himself, and then he gives worthless gifts to his friends. But it is interesting that
Hello friends, it is Niina from the Little Woman podcast. Just to let you all know that the Little Woman podcast episode transcripts are now available as books. You can find them as paperbacks and ebooks. They are wonderful reading for all the fans of Louisa May Alcott. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show.
it is not Joe who can get through him, but it's Amy. And it's probably because Joe at that point did not know what to do about him and how to help him to get him to be independent and find his own back. And Amy knew exactly how to treat him. This is a very common theme Louisa May Alcott shows, that there is a female character who is kind but sturdy, and then there is the male character who is not very self-reliant but slowly begins to learn that skill with the help of this female guide. Marches in the novel are friends with older Mr. Lawrence, not because he is rich, but because he uses his wealth to do good. One reason why Laurie gets his redemption arc in the novel is because Amy gets him in to support her philanthropist projects. Self-reliancy was a big part of Goethe's philosophy, but if we go back into the history of Germany and many other European countries that were Protestant, and this is a big part of American history as well, one part of spirituality was the idea that work is beautified by faith, and that work, even the most mundane work, has a higher meaning. We live in a very secular world, but understanding Christian aspect of Little Woman can make it easier to understand it. Transcendentalism, it has a mixed reputation these days. A lot of the bad stuff has been spread by Little Woman filmmakers who say that it is preachy and anti-feminist. It is very ironic because the Transcendentalists were an important part of the first wave of feminism in America, and they believed in the woman's right to work. Louisa, her sisters, May, Anna, and Lizzie, they were all working girls. Louisa's mother, Abel, was one of the first American social workers. In Little Woman, the Marches, they used to be on higher place in the society. In the novel, Aunt March is sister of Joe's father, and she apparently married a wealthy husband who died, and they had a child together, but the child died as well, which would make any person very sad and bitter. So Aunt March is wealthy, but she is not happy. Joe describes Uncle March being one of her favorite people in the world. He was kind and he liked to play with kids, and that he had a big library. Uncle March actually sounds a lot like Friedrich. Why did Greta Gerwig decide that it was a great idea to make Aunt March a rich spinster who never wanted to marry? I have no idea. It reminded me what my friend Melody Ellison said. Greta Gerwig decided to put herself above everyone else, Louisa May Alcott included. So all the money that Aunt March had in the novel It had come from her husband. The Marches, they used to have more money, but when their father allowed a black child to enter his school, he lost his position, and that's when the Marches became poor. In reality, the Alcotts, they were a lot poorer than the Marches. Friedrich and Joe, they are on the same social level. They are both poor, and they know what it is like to be poor. Before the father lost his job, Joe's family, they were not super rich, but they were living quite comfortably. Friedrich had the same experience in Berlin. He was a respected professor. He would get a monthly paycheck. He lived alone, so his expenses were less than in New York. But then his sister got ill. He moved to New York, and sister died, and he adopted his nephews. And the only job that he could find was position of a language tutor. Some of the things that Joe falls in love with Friedrich is that he is hardworking and self-reliant, and that he supports Joe and her desire to work and make her own money. In the chapter Friend, which is terribly adapted in most films, Friedrich sees that Joe is struggling to write for Weekly Volcano. The stories that she was asked to write forced her to look material that caused her depression and anxiety. One of the methods that the transcendentalists used as a way to transcend was that they would sort of scan themselves. They would look at the situation, their own doings from multiple different angles, and see if there was something that needed to be changed. Louisa did this all her life. In Little Woman, Amy, Joe, Laurie, and Friedrich, and other characters, they all have these kind of moments of clarity. When Friedrich tells Joe that the sensational stories can corrupt a person's mind, Joe agrees with him because these sensational stories have already been corrupting her mind. And this is one of the things that has never been adapted. Louisa's experience was the same as Joe's. She wrote sensational stories, and then she had a moment of clarity. We could compare this to a person who is working for a company. The payment is small, they get no appreciation, and the content they are asked to produce goes against their own personal values. Friedrich helps Joe to see all that, and by doing that, she gets her self-worth back. Her writing also improves, because after this, Friedrich gives Joe a set of Shakespeare's novels, and Joe begins to search for her own literal style. The amazing thing about this is that Joe does exactly the same thing to Friedrich. Friedrich is described to be a very friendly and extrovert person, but the narrator also mentions that he feels quite isolated. He is not in a place in his life where he would like to be. He is in a job that doesn't give him many challenges or professional satisfaction. The narrator, Louisa, mentions that he dreams about falling in love and starting a family. He loves his nephews, but he is also painfully aware that it would be difficult to find a person who is ready to accept the boys as well to their life. Louisa May Alcott also points out that Friedrich has experienced discrimination for being German, and this makes it difficult for him to find a job. The best adaptation that shows this is Little Woman musical. It even has a line where Friedrich tells Joe that ever since he started to fall for her, his students told him that he is much happier and smiles all the time. In the novel, it is the night before Joe is leaving. Friedrich gets his moment of clarity, like, oh my god, I'm so in love with this woman, what should I do? And the reason why Joe goes back home, it's not because they argue like in the films, it's because Beth gets ill, and Friedrich lost a sister. He knows what it is like. Joe does the same to Friedrich what he has done to her. She inspires him to take life by the balls. He starts to look for another job so he could provide both Joe and his nephews, and when Joe accepts his proposal and they begin to turn Plumfield into a school, Joe in a way returns him his previous status as a professor, and he simultaneously supports her career as a writer. This is how Joe tells to her family about her plans. Now, my dear people, continued Joe earnestly, just understand that this isn't a new idea of mine, but a long-cherished plan. Before Mike Fritz came, I used to think how, when I'd made my fortune and no one needed me at home, I'd hire a big house and pick up some poor, forlorn little lads who hadn't any mothers and take care of them and make life jolly for them before it was too late. I see so many going to ruin who want help at the right minute. I love so do anything for them. I seem to feel their wants and sympathize with their troubles, and oh, I should so like to be a mother to them. I told my plan to Fritz once, and he said it was just what he would like, and agreed to try it when we got rich. Bless his dear heart, he's been doing it all his life, helping poor boys, not getting rich. That he'll never be. Mine doesn't stay in his pocket long enough to lay up any, but now, thanks to my good old aunt, who loved me better than I ever deserved, I'm rich. At least I feel so, and we can live at Plumfield perfectly well if we have a flourishing school. It's just a place for boys, the house is big, and the furniture strong and plain. There's plenty of room for dozens inside, and splendid grounds outside. They could help in the garden and orchard. Such work is healthy, isn't it, sir? Then Fritz could train and teach in his own way, and father will help him. I can feed and nurse and pet and scold them, and mother will be my standby. I've always longed for lots of boys, and never had enough. Now I can fill the house full and revel in the little dears to my heart's content. Think what luxury. Plumfield my own, and wilderness of boys to enjoy with me. Philosopher Walter Emerson was Louisa's friend and neighbor. I will read you a quote from his book, Self-Reliancy. What I must do is all that concerns me, not what the people think. This rule, equally arduous in actual and intellectual life, may serve for the whole in distinction between greatness and meanness. It is the harder, because you will always find those who think they know what is your duty better than you know it. It is easy in the world to live after the world's opinion. It is easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great man is he who in the minds of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. What Waldo is saying that trusting your own instincts is always the best path to take, and it is also the more difficult one, because there are always people who try to convince you to go against what you know is right. Here is a quote from Rose's early novel, Lady and the Woman, where she discusses on her ideas of marriage. Eligible Edward Windsor claims that the style of woman he most admires are those such as claim our protection and support, giving us in return affection and obedience, beautiful and tender creatures, submissive to our will, confident in our judgment, and lenient to our faults, to be cherished in sunshine and sheltered in storms. Kate Loring, a young woman of 24, with no pretensions to beauty, who has raised her 4 orphan brothers, replies, "You have given your idol a heart, but no head. I would have her humble, though self-reliant, gentle, true strong, man's companion, not his plaything, able and willing to face storms, as well as sunshines, and share life's burdens as they come." Louise was part of the women's movement that developed into the first wave of feminism. One of the moving powers of this movement was to encourage people to marry for love instead of money. Most marriages of the time were made because of financial reasons. In Little Woman, Mommy says to the sisters that she would rather see them married to poor men and be happy than unhappily with rich men. All the marriages in Little Woman, in one way or another, are wrapped around this idea that love is connected to self-reliancy. It is a very Christian idea of marriage, the idea that you build something better together with your significant other. I usually try to avoid politics and religion in all of my podcasts, but because Louisa May Alcott was a Christian and it had a big impact on her worldview, this is one of the things where I make an exception. When Louisa was in her early 20s, she considered marrying for money to help out her family. In Little Woman, this element is given to Amy, and a lot of people think that this makes Amy a social climber. I don't think that was Louisa's intention. The book Amy considers marrying Fred won't because she wants to lift her family away from poverty. She's not thrilled about the idea. She sees it as her duty. Sometimes I wonder if the people who criticize Amy for marrying Laurie, who is rich but not as rich as Fred, but still wealthy, would they be as quick to criticize Jo if she had married Laurie? The cause of the whole argument is the lack of Laurie's character arc in the adaptations. In the 19th century, despite of the desire to work, women's work areas were limited. There was some factory work, but often women would work as maids or governess or tutors. Amy writes in her letters that if the artist career doesn't take off, one of the options is to come back home to Concord and work as an art teacher.